action, so we'll wait on the voting items until the quorum. Good morning. This is the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee meeting for March 2024. The HIAC currently serves as the governance board for NC 501 Asheville Buncombe Community, a continuum of care related to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, coordinating homeless programs in Asheville and Buncombe County. I'll do the roll call. I'm here, Lance is here, David Bartholomew.
Here.
Jamie Benshoff.
Here.
Elvia Diaz.
Here.
Rick Freeman. Lacey Hoyle. Claire Hubbard. Tricia Killian. Marcus Laws. Tim McLeay. Celeste Ordaway.
Here. Joelle
Steininger.
Here.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have a quorum. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the February 8th meeting. Do we have any motion or discussion related to that?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any questions, corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Our community value for contemplation this month is creating an accountable and transparent governance structure. The COC will advance a vision for a COC governance structure that is clear, efficient, and set up to effectively and accountably drive the community's work to end homelessness. This is some work that has been underway. We can celebrate the success of the first membership meeting of the new COC. We'll have a report from Lance later on. Is there any other conversation around this topic? Okay, thank you. First item on the agenda is a presentation related to community engagement and homeless services from Leadership Asheville. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having us.
Can you state your name? Go ahead and state your name.
Yeah, my name is Mike Mitchell. I'm with Leadership Asheville, and we're working on a group project to kind of address community resources to help residents address and understand homelessness. So for anybody who doesn't know, Leadership Asheville is a year-long leadership program where people in the community can become a part of that and learn about the community and how they can become engaged and help learn about the leaders in the community and things that are going on in the community and kind of hone their own leadership skills. It's just the specific mission is to strengthen participants' knowledge of commitment to and involvement in a collaborative community leadership. And as part of, you can go to the next slide. As part of, oh, sorry. You skipped, sorry, no, right. You can go back one, please. Yeah. So the project scope that we have, I have these out of order. Sorry. So as part of Leadership Asheville, we're required to participate in a group project, and what we decided to take on was trying to address the need for community resources for our community, not directly for homeless people because they have many resources themselves, but to help interconnect the various agencies that are helping and providing resources for homeless and to help citizens and business leaders find those resources and know what's available. So our group includes Amy Jonason, Brent Wilson, David Nelson, Jamie Gilpin, myself, Rachel Wood, and Zach Pamphilis. And our scope basically includes trying to create this resource guide. And so we were coming up with ways to reach out to these various agencies that are providing resources and trying to find out the best way to help the continuum of care maybe be able to document this. Perhaps it could be a resource that wherever the continuum of care becomes hosted on the web, that it could be a resource people could access, and these various agencies could update frequently in order to keep the information updated and relevant. We would like to create a resource that's not something where at the end of our project, which technically ends in May, just disappears, but becomes an ongoing resource that can be a tool used into the future, improved, but could be just that seed that could grow into something very useful for the community, similar to some things we've seen in other cities across the nation, where they have very well-crafted websites that have resources that people can access, scheduling meetings where people can go and meet and kind of learn about what's happening in the community. The kind of key data points that we are gathering in this resource guide is the various organizations or agencies, where the website is, that if they have one, a phone number of if somebody wanted to reach out to the agency, how they could contact them, where they're located, a key contact and what their role is in that agency, and specific populations that agency particularly serves, such as children, women, men, families, whether it's elderly folks in the community, and then also just kind of coming up with opportunities that particular organization has for community members to become involved in, whether it's volunteer time, financial resources, or specific donation needs. And one thing that we wanted to reach out here is to find out if there's any particular data points that we should add to that list. And also, is this something you feel is useful for the continuum of care that could be utilized, or if there's some way you think we should improve it? Yes.
Hi, Mike. I'm Jamie. I have lived experience. That's my role here.
Yeah.
And is this a seed program by UNCA? Is there some kind of connection?
I believe Leadership Asheville is associated with UNCA. Yeah. So it is something that is run by UNCA. But our particular group is just it's something that Rachel, who has experience with the city and receives phone calls and knows of people in the city that receive phone calls of business owners or community members saying, I've seen someone sleeping in front of my business. What am I to do? Or, some people in the community might be saying, I hear about this in the news. How can I become involved? How can I help? People without information feel helpless. So we wanted to provide a source of information and also to help that interconnection that we feel is part of the goal of the continuum of care, is to kind of create this network of organizations to become stronger together. Does that answer your question?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Elvia.
Hi. Good morning.
So a resource guide is something that the continuum of care itself, as its members, should be creating. So if you're a member,
I'm thinking of signing up, yes, definitely.
you should be a member.
Yeah.
And to create that with community involvement. But second of all, I'm just gonna know of all the resources that I can see in my head floating around, and all the paperwork that I know from that extends and touches like all of our communities, including Hendersonville. I've gone out to Mount Mitchell, and I've just tried to get everything to connect so that we can travel and become one.
Yeah.
And I know of like places and entities that will repair your car and do all these other types of things so that you're not stuck.
Yeah.
I think that what we're missing here is what we're going to create rather than what exists.
Yes, and I think one thing that we've started is a Google form that we can create that has basically all the data points that we're trying to gather that we as a group are sending out to probably 24, maybe more organizations that we've kind of identified in the community and the surrounding area that serve the homeless population and or people in need or in risk of homelessness, and trying to create that list, send that list out, get the feedback, kind of create that database. And some of this is just from feedback that we've received from people in the city, and trying to gather that information together, and then that Google form could live on. It could be a resource that that someone in the continuum of care could manage and periodically reach out to people, or maybe it could be something that lives somewhere where organizations know how to get to it, that if they want to become involved or be connected, they could fill it out.
This sounds like a subcommittee for the continuum of care, though. When you come inside of the continuum of care and you work with community members that are here, this is the work that we talk about doing there.
Yeah.
So you should become a member.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
Could I chime in? I
sure.
think that is exactly right. And as we're in this time of transition with our continuum of care, to me, this is kind of similar to the homelessness learning series that staff have been doing, that Debbie has been doing, where we want to kind of seed these initiatives, but then be sure that they tie into the Community Relations Committee in particular is where I would envision this sort of migrating into or integrating in with once that committee is appointed later this year. I don't know if you'd want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I do second what Elvia said. I would encourage you to become members, because this is the type of work that the COC will be doing.
Yeah.
Kind of, I think the purpose of this and the purpose of the COC do kind of align, so I think joining membership and contributing to the work that the COC is doing will be really helpful.
Great.
As we, are in an election process, we kind of talk about what groups and what leadership roles we don't have. And so as a leadership role, it may be something in the future that we see as a leadership, specifically, maybe you're the leader of that, sort of what we do as a leg of like what I've been calling, like we have a body, right? This is our community body, and then you are a leg that controls that entity and then reports back to the body, right? I think that's a great way to view
definitely.
that.
I definitely agree that there needs to be that kind of committee that kind of works on that, yes.
Any other comments? I'll again reiterate what Elvia said, that, membership in the continuum of care is essential for this. I think it could be a great help. The other thing I would lift up again is the work of the staff at our lead agency, City of Asheville. So whatever this website becomes will have to be handed off to somebody to administer. So whatever work you do should be done in coordination with this body in transition, but also especially with the staff at the city, because that will not change in the short term.
Yeah. Well, it's like if anybody on this,
Not to leave anybody out.
if anybody on this committee wants to reach out to us or anything, has any additional feedback afterwards, feel free to contact us. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. All right. Permanent supportive housing planning. Nikki?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nikki Reed. I am the Director of Community and Economic Development for the City of Asheville, and I'm also a COC member. So I want to be very intentional about that, because as the earlier conversation about how we're in transition, I think is very relevant to the conversation that we're going to have today about the future of the Ramada property. And so I want to begin by really just walking through some of the past milestones that have led us to where we are today. I know Emily has sent you all a post that the city published about this project, and so I'm just going to kind of cover those, and then perhaps we'll talk about the future. So backing up to where we were in 2020, one of the headlines I saw this morning was that March 13th was the day that a national emergency was declared for the pandemic. So it's kind of incredible to think about that. And so putting that into perspective was really important for me. So our community experienced this unprecedented increase in unsheltered homelessness during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in the summer of 2021, the city responded by entering into a plan to purchase the Ramada, at the time for the emergency shelter, right? Later that fall, it became clear that the city could not secure the needed resources to proceed with that project. And so at that time, the city could have walked away from that plan to purchase the property, but instead, the city assigned its real estate contract to a developer, Shangri-La. And the intention from Shangri-La was that they were going to convert the property into permanent supportive housing, bring in a nonprofit partner in Step Up to run the supportive services to provide there as well. And so with this group stepping into that real estate contract, the city's role would be to provide no funds to support the acquisition or the renovations of the property. However, at the time, the city did agree to fund the supportive service element, and that would occur when the property was completed, the renovations were complete, and then Step Up was there up and running. So that was the decision made. I think that was December of 2021. So about a year later, then Shangri-La purchased the property. So it took about that length of time to really go through the process. And so a year later, Shangri-La purchased the property. A meaningful detail here is just to recognize that at the time that that purchase transaction, the city took out a deed restriction for the property. And so part of that original assignment of the real estate contract was a deed restriction. And that deed restriction, I think, is very meaningful as we look to the future of this property. So we'll get back to that. The deed restriction restricts the hotel property for use as permanent supportive housing, and that's a 50-year deed restriction. Okay, so that was the closing. So then after closing, 2022, we saw some work being done at the Ramada. Some demolition took place, but in 2023, that's really things started to change, right? Where what we were hearing from Shangri-La is that they needed to refinance the property to then complete the renovations, right? And so while we were ready to see this property really move forward, we had a great need in our community. We have a great need in our community for permanent supportive housing. Where we are today is that Shangri-La has fallen through. The property went into foreclosure. And so now where it stands is that the lender is the full owner of the property, so the foreclosure has completed, and we're in a new place as it relates to Ramada. I think the thing that I really want to emphasize is that, you know, the city, I think, very much regrets this outcome, is disappointed. I think we really wanted to see additional permanent supportive housing come online to support our community. But where I think our next steps really come into play is with that deed restriction. So that deed restriction carried through the foreclosure and will continue to govern the use of the property. So that's important to remember, as well as the initial funding that the city had obligated to this project was never spent. And so those are the things that I am mindful of. And then I think even more importantly than that is that we are now in this transition of working through the continuum of care. And so for me, looking to how we use that planning body to really help us transition into the next steps with the Ramada is what I'm looking forward to, and what I really am here today to offer with this group is to share in that. So I'm willing to take any questions, helpful to kind of understand where we've been, but also looking forward to next steps. Yes, Jimmy?
I'm unclear on the deed restriction. Was it a restriction against permanent supportive housing? So the point of Shangri-La was moot?
It's just the opposite, in fact. And so what the deed restriction states is that it requires the property to be used as permanent supportive housing. And so, and one thing that I forgot to mention is, so what's happening now, so as the lender has gone through the foreclosure, what that means is that they own the property right now. And so they own it, they control who to sell it to. I know as the lender, they are likely very interested. Lenders are not in the business of owning property, so they're very much interested in selling the property, but that deed restriction will carry forward. And so that anyone who's interested in buying the property has to contemplate that use for permanent supportive housing and fulfill that use as permanent supportive housing at the hotel. Thanks.
Nikki, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I always talk.
I was just wondering, first of all, thank you for this update, it's really great. Will the city still invest that money in whatever project does come through?
I think that's a great question. And I think what I'll say is that it will be the city council's responsibility to take action on that funding. And so working backwards from what that looks like when city council votes around that funding is what we have yet to really figure out, right?
Okay.
And so that's part of why I'm thinking about the COC and what level of involvement there. I'm really looking at how that decision gets made is important for how the COC orients here. So we know that city council will ultimately make that funding decision, but how we get there, I think, is important.
And is the housing authority actively involved in whatever comes of this property?
So I appreciate that because another element to this, so as the project took shape with Shangri-La and Step Up, a key element of how it all came together was not only the city resources, but also housing authority resources. I believe the VA was involved because of the vouchers that the people living there would use, as well as support services that would come from VA. Because again, the plan was 50 units of housing for individuals and then 50 units for veterans. And so that's the other piece of this that I think is so appropriate for the COC is knitting together those supportive service elements, the funding from other partners with vouchers that comes through, as well as the city's role in this, how all that fits together really does mirror the COC.
Because I think there's obviously lessons learned from Compass Point and how those vouchers are available at this point in time to that project comes to my mind, so that's why.
It's a great point.
If I can add, I have too much going on over here. I think that's exactly right, and I would say that the lender probably, but more importantly, whoever will end up purchasing the property will need to have that conversation with the housing authority and be sure they go through the appropriate steps to get those secured, if that's part of the intention.
So I don't think that that's completely bad news. Banks do not like to own property. So whether or not we purchase the property or anybody purchases the property, it is going to housing and for purposes of the same purposes that we were purchasing the property for. So I think time is kind of is what we're working with here, and that we're not out and purchasing this property. We're still looking at this property?
Well, I appreciate your comment to say that we are in alignment, that we've not lost the opportunity to have permanent supportive housing at that property. We have not lost that opportunity. It's still there. It's just who, right? Who is the appropriate party to buy the property, be able to renovate the property for permanent supportive housing? Who is there at the table to provide the supportive services? What does that look like? And then how does it get funded? And I think, again, I think that's how the COC really plays a role as the planning body for how this functions. So that's what's so exciting is how can we take this setback, right? and then lean into that COC framework to then help us deliver perhaps a better project than what was previously planned. Yes, Rick?
Is there anyone in any part of the city that is continuing a dialogue with the lender?
The lender has contacted us, and what was very beneficial about that conversation is the recognition of the deed restriction. So that was something that I wanted to ensure was heard and acknowledged, and it was. And so that's why I'm here today, is that we're standing on that, and we're standing on the legal parameters around that deed restriction.
Is it possible for the lender to come to city council for a rezoning?
So,
If you're not sure, we should just get with the planning and urban design folks and all that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, if there isn't a buyer soon, perhaps, a lot of stuff gets rezoned in this town. You know, there's conditional zoning all the time from this to that, you know, for those kinds of reasons. So I just think it's going to be a while before the COC stands up the appropriate committee to be on top of this, and I'd hate for it to leak through other than you, who understands where we are, you know, by an approach for conditional zoning to back to hotel or residential or something like that.
I think what's helpful here, and this is why I'm emphasizing the deed restriction, is it's another layer, because you're absolutely right. Zoning is a land use instrument, right, that the city governs through its regulatory hat. The deed restriction is separate and distinct and a separate legal instrument that governs the property. So it's both and.
So would they have to come back through the city attorney?
And through city council. Any
And through-
change to that deed restriction would be on the city to modify, release, cancel, or not, right?
Okay.
So it is in the cities, that's the leverage, the control that we have.
Okay.
Above and beyond zoning, so it's
Yeah, it's just,
helpful.
it's not unbelievable that as their money is sitting there making none, that they would reach out into the city to see what kind of headwind they'd have to do something else. I mean, like Elliot said, they don't like to own property. So I think we just need to put feelers out into the city attorney's office and just, unless it's confidential and we can't know, just know if the lender is thinking about other approaches, you know, just so it's not, suddenly it appears on city council agenda and we haven't had any opportunity to discuss it with them.
Thank you, Rick.
So
My understanding, you confirm this, but my understanding is that that's what Nikki's saying about the conversation with the lender, that the lender said, we understand that there is a deed restriction that we'll convey to the new owner. And so the intention from the lender is to, you know, to sell to someone who will fulfill that original purpose or that restricted purpose.
50 years, right?
So Elvia's question seemed to be related to whether the city had any thoughts of repurchasing the property. I just want to check with you on that.
I mean, I don't know if the city is in the best position to purchase the property. Again, these kinds of conversations is what I would, as a member of the COC, I would want to participate in. I know, thinking about these work groups and how they might function, like I could see my role as a COC member and City of Asheville to talk and workshop these ideas. I don't know if the city is best positioned, because if the plan is permanent supportive housing, I would hope that there's developer capacity. There are developers that do this kind of work. I would think that they would be better suited to do something like this than the city. But I mean, I think we have to workshop these ideas and really come together around what makes the most sense. Still, any decisions on acquiring that property whatsoever would be a council decision.
Do you remember what the original purchase price was?
I do. So it was 9.75 was the original purchase price of the property. And then through the foreclosure, see, Shangri-La had brought cash equity to the deal. And so the lender had loaned, I think it's 6.3 was what the lender had loaned into the property. So presumably, with any kind of foreclosure, you would hope that there's an opportunity there to maybe dial in that price.
So from the city's perspective, do you need anything right now from this body?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's our only challenge, really, is that as we transition to the COC, there's still a little time in that transition. And so, you know, it would, I think if we had the board sat, we would, you know, talk about maybe work groups or committees that could potentially look at the permanent supportive housing and how this project might fit in. So I think I'm just open to how to participate in any early conversations that may help us understand that. But right now, I think I just wanted to provide this update to the group.
So if developers reach out to you now, what is your direction?
We are
to them?
sharing the same information, basically. We have a deed restriction. There's no decisions that have been made yet around the funding that's available. And we have a COC that is taking shape, and that will be, they will play an important role in planning these activities, along with all the other support services that would be necessary to bring this to fruition. Yes.
I have a question. I'm not as schooled on the intricacies of funding, but are those funds earmarked for permanent supportive housing, or could they be used into an emergency shelter?
At the time, so right now, the funds, it was $500,000 in ARPA funds and $1 million in city dollars that had been earmarked for affordable housing. So they came from an affordable housing source of funds. So, and City Council made a budget amendment to allocate that total to this project. But the fact that nothing has been spent, and now here where we are, it would make sense that a decision would need to be made about those funds, especially because it's ARPA. There's a time limit there towards the end of the year, and the funds are available, and we have needs. So it is timely that we would need to have that decision be made for those funding sources.
Just for this body, I guess I would ask the question whether anybody sees any less need for permanent supportive housing today than we had this time last year.
No.
So if a developer comes forward, we are actively encouraging that to move forward.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
If I might, David, since we have the excellent resource of Nikki here from staff, I know it's not typical to have public comment during agenda items, but it's not that it hasn't been done before. So I thought that perhaps the HIAC might consider opening the floor to see if there was public comment on this item while we have the staff resource here.
Any objection?
No, but a reminder, we're having mic issues, so if you could lean into your mic when you speak, that would be great.
Are there any public comments on this issue? Yeah, come up to the microphone.
Thank you all. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you state your name?
My name is Eric Hall. Been the property manager at the Ramada Inn. I was hired by Shangri-La. They seem to have dropped the ball, but that hadn't happened, and it's not going to happen with me. But my concerns are the past year and a half, I have been able to earn a rapport with our neighbors behind us in condominiums and with the business owners in River Ridge Plaza to change the mystique and the image that the Ramada once had, understandably. And since Shangri-La has, I've lost my bosses. I hadn't been paid since December 2nd, but the property has to be maintained. I don't have the foot traffic hardly anymore. I have once in a while at night, in the middle of the night, just people drive through, curiosity seekers, people park, and I have to approach them to let them know that it is private property. And it's always been my job, and I'm not hired by them anymore, but it's my job. That's become my baby, so to speak, is the Ramada. And that spills over to the safety of the residents next door and the wages and the people and business owners in River Ridge to maintain it and keep it that way. And I haven't been able to speak with the bank in enough conversations. They know I'm there and they appreciate it. But like you said, they're not in the business of, they just want to flip it. But they understand it needs to be maintained and the safety of that property and the residents around it and that community. And I have changed the old image, and I'm proud of it. And I would hate to see it go back to the foot traffic and the darkness that settled across that place was terrible. And if it's not maintained, the police officers are going to get more calls. The city council is going to get flooded with calls because it's going to be overtaken again. And I'm scared that's going to happen. And of course, my well-being is important too. But I want to see this through because I was the one that stood on the stage and represented Shangri-La that didn't lie about the property and what his intent was. Sir, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Any other comments?
So this is more like a question for you all.
Tell us your name,
I'm
please.
Stephen Mariscalco. Nice to see some of y'all, all y'all. So this, I'm looking for insight. I don't really know all the back workings of how like shelters work or permanent supportive housing works. Like for like a developer coming in, where do they make their funds? How do they make their money just by the vouchers and by the rent that they get from the different individuals that are gonna be staying there? I don't really know how that works. And if anybody has insight on like how that developer is gonna make money. That's my question, because, you know, it's important for developers that are getting involved. You know, somebody that may not be already a developer in supportive housing that would want to do that. That's just a question. I'm not a developer, just wondering.
I think that's probably an offline conversation because it can be very complicated. But,
Okay.
I mean, I'd be glad to talk with you for a few minutes after the meeting to
Okay.
give you an idea about that.
Thank you.
I can, if it's okay, I can speak to the Shangri-La structure. That is one example of that, you know, just like in any project, all of the funding and financing and how those things flow it varies by project. But as an example, the Shangri-La structure was that they used private capital, so their own money, bank money, to buy the property, and then rent from vouchers would pay back that original loan, so that's how the acquisition gets funded. And also rent from vouchers would pay for property management, so the kind of thing Eric was just talking about. And then they would partner with a nonprofit to provide supportive services that would be funded totally separately. So that's where the city's 1.5 million that Nikki mentioned was intended to fund those supportive services.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Does anybody feel a need for a work group on this issue in case a developer comes forward in the short term pending?
Yes.
Anybody want to participate in such an informal work group?
Yes.
I have one taken.
I would help.
Maybe. You can find some time, yes.
Anybody else? All right. Celeste?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It sounds like certainly if developers contact the city, we should be sure that they get connected with you at the VA for the HUD-VASH component.
Yeah, the VA component was very important of the, on the original idea, so, yeah. All right, anything else on the Ramada? Okay. Code Purple update from Tim and also from Elizabeth, I believe.
Elizabeth, would you like to go first?
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Chapman with I'm the Social Services Program Manager and Shelter Director for the Salvation Army Center of Hope. We have had on average nightly 12 people. At the beginning it was a little bit more, so we veered more towards 20 people. We did have a couple of women staying in our foyer as well as a couple of elderly folks, some animals, but that just shows the diversity of our population right now. As we're working towards diversity and working with the individuals that are coming in for shelter and for Code Purple. But for Code Purple purposes, our biggest challenge was probably COVID quarantine downstairs. The reason why we had consistently 12 people and not the 16 on most nights, we had a lot of COVID quarantine during that time as well. We had to use one room for quarantine while the other one was being utilized for those Code Purple people. But everything else seemed to go pretty smoothly, and hopefully we're going into warmer weather. It's been a warm winter, so I'm hoping it's almost over with, but that's kind of where we're at. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Any questions?
Good to see you, Elizabeth.
Good to see you.
I am really happy to hear that you did a quarantine with COVID patients. I'm really proud of that. Thank you so much.
Okay. And then for ABCCM, certainly we've had, I think, a pretty productive Code Purple season and a very busy one. Year to date, Code Purple season to date, I should say, through March 11th, we've had 90 episodes of Code Purple. We're way ahead of what we did last year. Last year for the whole, and I say year, I should say season. For the whole season, we had 68 episodes. So we're up 22 episodes of Code Purple over last year. Total night stays between Veterans Restoration Quarters, where we serve men, Transformation Village, where we serve women and children. We've had a total of 5,967 stays with an average nightly stay of 66 so far. I think some key things to point out. We've called Code Purple 22 times this season just based on wind chill. So, of course, that means that the temperature was above the freezing mark, but because of the weather conditions and that sort of thing, we always look at wind chill and then, call for that. So we've had 22 times that we've done that. Twice we executed Code Purple more of in a disaster contingency fashion due to the burn ban that we had back in November. We partnered with city and county, and us and Salvation Army opened their facilities to serve people during that. So that was 2 nights. And then, of course, we opened on Christmas, kept our doors open for anybody that wanted to come there, although it certainly wasn't Code Purple temperatures then. We just didn't want folks on the street during Christmas, so we brought them in, gave them presents, gave them a nice meal, that sort of thing. So we were really happy about that. And looking at the trending going forward, because we still have about 6 weeks left of the Code Purple season. Last year we had 10 episodes in March, 3 in April, so we're starting to wane there. So far in March, we've just had 3 episodes, although next week it's looking like we might be blessed, if you will, with a couple more Code Purple days. But we're certainly getting close to the ending of the season. One thing that I've certainly saw during this season is just, I think, the amount of planning and preparation that went in, not just at the ABCCM level, but at the community level. And I think we saw really positive results for how we've been able to work together and, as a community, what we put out there. Community paramedics have been invaluable to what we've done this season. Certainly Asheville Transit has stepped up to the plate again this year and really helped us out with getting people out to the facilities and out of the cold and that sort of thing. I think all of our community partners in general have worked really closely together through this season. I know that we've gotten calls just in general from the community saying, hey, I saw, someone over here that looked like they were in distress, or whatever, so we can go out and get them. And that's exactly what we want, folks from the community letting us know where folks are so we can go, serve them and that sort of thing. As always, we've had our vans out in the street as well, not only picking people up and bringing them in, but distributing food and clothing and, basic necessities for anybody that was out there that did not want to, come in for whatever reason. I think communication has been exceptional this year, not just with community partners, but also in our ability to educate and get the word out about Code Purple. The Code Purple information line that we had set up has worked extremely well this year. We've had almost 1,900 calls on that line through the season. So that's been a really effective mean for us. So we'll continue to monitor weather conditions and execute Code Purple going forward through the rest of the season.
Questions?
More of sharing resources. When we did the point in time count, we did interview people who wouldn't go into shelters for Code Purple, and that was kind of part of the questions. And there is a group, I think they're out of West Asheville, and they're a Facebook page that many of the homeless interface with because they can input their request, and the organizers will see if somebody can step up and provide it to them. Things like warm clothing, sleeping bags, money like for cigarettes or food, items like that. And I think it's called Surviving Asheville, but it sounds like a grassroots response and something that many people are learning about and relying on.
Any other comments or questions for Tim or Elizabeth?
I just want to thank the VRQ shelter provider, ABCCM, for providing all of that you just described, as well as Salvation Army. It's really needed, appreciated.
While we have everyone here, I also wanted to express gratitude for maintaining Code Purple, but also expanding it. I know there was a lot of work to remove barriers. You mentioned the burn ban. Also during the point in time count, I saw a lot of flexibility, and I'm really proud of the community wrapping around this work.
All right, thank you. Continuing with care competition debrief, Emily.
Hopefully, this looks familiar to you all, and you recall seeing this last year. So this is related to our annual federal Continuum of Care funding, which is about $2 million. HUD calls that the Continuum of Care competition. As you know, you approve, as our Continuum of Care board, you approve the consolidated application for that $2 million. That consolidated application has two components. One is the priority listing of all of the individual projects. So that is permanent supportive housing at Homeward Bound, rapid rehousing at Helpmate, and our HMIS project that covers the vendor costs for our community. That's the priority listing. The accompanying part is called the COC application, which is that just god-awful narrative application that we put together, again, that you all approved. Combined, those are called the consolidated application. HUD reviews consolidated applications from COCs across the country, scores those on a 200-point scale, and then makes awards based in part on the score. The only feedback we get from HUD, as you know, we've already gotten those awards announced. We talked about that at a recent HIAC meeting. The only feedback we get from HUD about the application that we submitted is these two documents that were in your meeting materials. So this is the debrief from HUD that explains, minimally explains what our score was and the reason that we scored that. So this is the only input that we'll get about how to improve our application. Sometimes these raise more questions than they provide answers, but ideally this lets us see where we didn't score well and where we have opportunity to improve. The higher our score, the more competitive we are for those dollars, and so our dollars can increase over time if we can improve our score. This document shows the maximum number of points available for each category and then what our particular score was. So if you'll scroll through this. I'm sorry. So I'm going to talk through this briefly, happy to answer any questions. But again, our big opportunity here is to identify where we as a continuum of care can make improvements in our collaborative work so that we can reflect those improvements in this document in the next application cycle, improve our score, and improve our dollars. So we scored relatively well on this first pass at coordination and engagement. We got full points on street outreach. We got 0 points on expanding rapid rehousing, and that was true for COCs across the country. Almost every COC had an increase in rapid rehousing during the pandemic because of CARES Act and ARPA funding. And as those dollars sunsetted, then every COC had a decrease in rapid rehousing as a result. So a lot of COC chatter about losing points in this particular section. But what HUD wants to see is that our rapid rehousing inventory is increasing continually over time. Full points for non-congregate sheltering and coordination with public health agencies. 5 out of 7 points related to advancing racial equity. 4.5 out of 5 related to involving people with lived experience of homelessness in the COC's work. 16 out of 21 in our process. So that's the funding allocations work group, that's our scorecard, that's the mechanics around the funding application process. Full points for the first time ever in HMIS, so 4 out of 4 points. That is related to participation in HMIS. What HUD wants to see is that at least 85% of the inventory for every type of project, so emergency shelter, transitional housing, et cetera, that at least 85% of those beds are HMIS participating. So this is the first time that we've ever gotten that full amount of points. Longitudinal systems analysis submission, there are only a handful of sections in this that are really within staff control, and this is one of those. So did we submit our report by the deadline? We did. And then system performance is where our biggest opportunity is in increasing our score. We did get full points for reduction in the number of first-time homeless. And then our points in the rest of this section were relatively low, so only 5 out of 13 related to strategy to reduce length of time homeless, 10 out of 13 related to exits to permanent housing, 1.5 out of 8 related to returns to homelessness, 4 out of 7 related to increasing employment cash income. What HUD wants to see in the responses in the system performance section is 2 things. Number 1, what is your strategy to improve your system performance in these ways? And number 2, who is responsible in your COC for implementing that strategy? What's the agency or the committee, a COC committee, that's responsible for developing that strategy and implementing it? So I think we have enormous opportunity with our new continuum of care structure and the committee structure that's prescribed in the charter to really have better arms around developing that strategy and making sure that it's being effective. And then here's our overall score. So 142.5 out of 200 points. And this is how that compares to COCs across the country. There are over 400 COCs in the US, and So we scored just below the median, well above the lowest score for any COC. 40-some points below the highest score. So plenty of room for improvement in our COC score, but also I think we did okay. Some of the, the questions, again, you all saw this in that COC application, but some of those coordination improvement opportunities relate to service delivery and service coordination, things like what's your plan to make sure that families are not split up when they're seeking shelter, and those kinds of very, very concrete service-oriented activities. And then again, the system performance and how we're measuring that. Questions about this?
What was our score last year, and did we go down due to that one area where most COCs?
I definitely can tell you that, but it will take me a minute to pull it up, and so let me come back to that.
Other questions?
Great. Second document that was also in your meeting materials is same thing for the domestic violence bonus. So these are the only two debriefs that we get from HUD. We don't get scores for individual project applications, but only for the domestic violence bonus and then that overall COC application. We were awarded the domestic violence project. That was the additional rapid rehousing at Helpmate. But we were awarded that project because of where you all ranked that in the priority listing. It was ranked number 2. So it was identified by this group as a high priority for our community, and that's why it was funded. You can see in the top section here that COCs that applied for a domestic violence bonus where the application scored at least 86.13 points. In those cases, then HUD conditionally awarded those projects, meaning they pulled it out of the priority listing and funded it separately, and then that bumped up all of the other projects on the priority listing to be funded. Our score, if you go down to the bottom, our project application score was 61.33, so that means we did not get pulled out. The DV bonus project did not get pulled out and funded separately, but got awarded basically as a regular project in our priority listing and was awarded based on how highly it was ranked by this group in the application process. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Any questions about that?
Any questions? Thanks, Emily. Moving on to committee updates. Lance?
All right, good morning, everyone. The update for the nominating membership committee is that we had our very first COC membership meeting. Thank you for the applause, Ken. Yeah, it is a huge milestone for our community. So it was an incredible night. We had over 120 people in attendance, all different stakeholders, elected officials, people with lived experience, service providers, community members who have an interest in being a part of the efforts to end homelessness. Out of that group, 97 were members eligible to vote, and the biggest vote of that night was to adopt the charter of the COC, which did pass. I think we were just one shy of a unanimous vote to adopt the charter, which I think is pretty good. So with that charter being adopted, that COC structure is now in place. So Monday after that meeting, we distributed instructions to membership on board applications, which are going to be due on March 22nd. So we are in the process. The next step, we have the membership body now. The next step is to seat the board. So after the 22nd, the nominating and membership committee will begin to review those applications and interview for those board seats. And then on April 25th, which will be our next COC meeting, the membership will vote to elect that new board. So that will be another huge milestone for the new COC structure. And I can't end without giving credit to this committee who has worked so much over the past year, put so much time, energy, effort, passion, discussion into making this become a reality. So Elvia Diaz, Rick Freeman, Tom Kirkgasser, Melanie Robertson, Carrie Thomason, Lacey Hoyle, and then of course our city council liaison, Kim Roney, and that really the heavy lifting too with the staff, support from Emily Ball and Sydney Monshaw. It's been critical to the success of getting this off the ground. So thank you to the committee and all the support we've had in pulling that off.
I wanted to give a shout out to the sensitivity to transportation, because I did see the link that if you needed a ride, in other words, because those of us who are on the bus wouldn't miss out. So I really appreciated that thoughtfulness.
Just a question to make sure that the application process for board memberships went out to, or board positions went out to all the members. I'm not going to apply for a board position, but I don't remember getting one, so I just want to make sure that we ensured that everyone got it.
Yes, you should have gotten an email on Monday, March 4th, which was the Monday following the first membership meeting, and that email would have come from the Homeless Strategy Division to all COC members. The subject line was something like first meeting recap and board application process. So yes, went to all members.
It may just have slipped my mind, but I wanted to ask to be sure. Rick?
I think maybe we should send a reminder out, because the 22nd is screaming toward us.
Yes, we will do that.
Okay, shelter team, Lacey.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll just briefly share. I was here in February sharing with this group the recommendations, the initial set of recommendations that the shelter team has come up with. And since that meeting, I have presented to the Board of Commissioners the same set of recommendations, gotten some feedback from them, and then Emily also presented to City Council to share the initial recommendations. The shelter team had an opportunity to engage in some drop-in sessions with the National Alliance to End Homelessness team when they were here for a separate training back in February. And so we really just kind of wanted to get feedback from the different entities that are involved at this point. And pretty soon we're going to reconvene that team to kind of recap everything, review everything that has happened since then, talk about the feedback from the National Alliance, and figure out our next steps.
I read with dismay the article in the paper about the city council meeting. How accurate of a representation was that, and where is our path forward?
I think that that's a question that I also have. I don't know if anyone from the city might be able to speak to that a little bit more.
I think we're referring to the article about the council retreat.
Yes.
So our retreat is an annual meeting that the council holds to define our strategic priorities. Our 6 strategic priorities inform our budget plans and policies for the year. We have maintained homeless strategies among the 6 strategic priorities. And then, of course, in the conversation around the goal about how we were going to instruct staff to do the work, we did have a group conversation in the retreat about what those goals look like. And I guess I can, at this point, I can't speak for the full council, but I can speak for myself that support for a low barrier shelter, as among the recommendations of the National Alliance to End Homelessness report, is something that I support because I want to reduce homelessness in our community. We are still having an ongoing conversation about the where and the how. So I think that as a group, we can expect that City Council will be having those conversations as we approach the budget process, but also specific locations. And this is where the shelter work group is so important in convening information, coming up with a plan. And I think that that will help both the city and the county to inform the actions when it comes to budget plans and policies and a location. Hopefully that's helpful. Once again, I'm speaking for myself and to the process at large.
I'll just add that the city council retreat was live streamed, and so I can send that link out to you all, and I can identify the part to start watching at where they discuss this. What I heard is exactly what you said, that the discussion really related to wanting to be sure there was a very strong plan in place before any support could be guaranteed. So really wanting to see all of the details of a shelter plan.
If you find yourself concerned, or as I heard the word dismayed, it is always advised that you can reach out to your city council and county commission directly, hearing support for the National Alliance to End Homelessness recommendations, to stay in the collective we. Things like that could be powerful messages to hear, certainly from this body. And then, of course, as your liaison, I'll be sending a report from this meeting to the full council and the county commission, so I can let them know that the concern was expressed.
Just in connection with this, my understanding is that there was some concern about the low barrier aspect, or the high access aspect, and also some concern potentially that existing shelter providers have not been engaged at this point in the discussion. And I think as a member of the shelter team, I'm going to advocate that we do find a way to involve existing shelter providers in the process fairly soon, unless anybody here objects to that idea.
I wonder why. I mean, I think it's a conversation for anybody who is interested in it, and I think that's kind of what the COC is about, right? Not just existing, but what new ideas are. Because 10 years of failure is 10 years of failure. 10 years of progress means we're creating something new. And I'd like to see something different.
I hear you, and I agree that it needs to be focused on the future, that the participation would need to be focused on the future, and it would need to be a shelter provider that is a member of the new COC and is willing to look toward this new high access model of service delivery.
And I'm thinking about what Mike, who is not a member yet, and is trying to bring together a group of providers, right? Is that right? Who wants to bring together a group of providers, right? And can deliver that new group of providers, right? Coming to the table for their ideas. And I think that's really important. I'm not really concerned with what the old business is. Old business is always going to come to the table and has permission to come to the table and should not be upset that they don't feel invited. I'm not understanding why you don't feel invited to share information. We've been here.
Because they weren't invited. No providers of any kind have participated in the shelter group to this point. And that was by design at the phase that it was. So just to set the record straight, that's how it was organized. That's how we got to the point we are, which has not begun the hard work on a long-term execution plan, and the funding necessary and the risks and challenges and all that stuff. So my feeling, I think, which is consistent with David's, because I'm on this group, is that old providers, new providers, all providers should be invited in to talk about how this can work, how it's going to need to be staffed, what those costs are likely to be, because that's the only way we're going to get the county and the city on board with funding.
And that's the job of the new COC. Hi, it really is.
So are you suggesting that it pause until the COC is seated and the COC can actually reconstruct the committee?
kind of looks like it is. Already. I mean,
That was not the intention of the shelter team. I mean, there needs to be a transition, of course, but the intention was that we would continue to plan for this and be ready to move forward with the new COC. And, you know, there are very specific guidelines that this body has approved and recommended to the city council about, or city and county about how this new shelter or shelter beds in however many locations should be structured.
yeah, structure.
Yeah. So that
Operative
would-
word right there.
That would be essential, that we invite agencies that are willing to provide shelter under that model.
Yes.
To be a part of the process, the planning process.
Agreed with the structure.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I was visioning things. Structure without necessarily, I mean, sort of a blank canvas. It is a blank canvas, and I wasn't necessarily seeing bodies and function, but ideas of who was coming to the table, not necessarily who was filling the positions and fighting for territory, as usual, and sewing up
Right.
position and being sole proprietors of said entities of who is going to function as.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I feel like people are saying that we're not invited to the table. I didn't feel like anybody was invited to the table yet. We're just sort of building the structure of saying what our needs are, because the needs of the people, that's who we're working for, right? And so we're still sussing out the needs. So inviting specific people to the table was not what we were doing yet.
Well, I agree with part of what you're saying, Elvia, that, you know, we are still refining the model, but the need was identified more than a year ago in the NAEH study for new shelter beds that are housing first focused and that are high access and
Low barrier, et
low
cetera, all the
barrier,
other,
et cetera.
yeah.
That framework
Absolutely.
is there, and that's what this body has approved and recommended to the city and county. And my only suggestion is that I believe it's a good time to bring in providers who are willing to implement a shelter under that model, to be part of the conversation. And all providers would be welcome to submit a letter of interest or something, but clearly it would need to be, you know, within the model identified and recommended by NAEH and by this body to date.
Sure, but it would be really nice to start that process with the idea of like bringing that into the new COC. Because I think some fresh ideas are really
And it would need to be part
warranted
of the
here.
new COC. Obviously, it
Yeah.
will need to transition within the next couple of months to the new COC
Yeah.
committee or whoever is identified to work on this project. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Any? All right. Hearing none. Coordinated entry, Marcus, any updates?
No updates as far as the work group goes. The city is still working on the community-wide by name list for civilians as well as veterans. And we're just now getting providers together to kind of solidify the process that will put together the veterans by name list. And once we have that in order, I figure we'll move forward with our work groups to kind of look at prioritization and as well as referrals and what that system will look like for the community.
I'll just add to that. I mentioned to you all before that we had submitted that request for technical assistance to redesign our coordinated entry system, and that was approved by HUD. We had the initial call with them. They have, when you get HUD technical assistance, you get 32 hours to begin with, and they, after our initial call, they immediately submitted an escalation request to increase those hours. And they are expecting, it's a team of 3 folks who've been assigned to RCOC. They're expecting to work with a committee in the new continuum of care structure and that this will be a long process. They said in some communities, this has been a year-long process to really work through the steps of a full system redesign, which is what we're hoping for, that would build on the work of the coordinated entry work group. So that is in process on their end. No work is happening in the meantime, but once they get that approval and once we have the committee, which I expect would include a lot of the same folks, but once we have that stood up within the new structure, then we'll get up and running in that process.
And are we working to ensure that the new system is racially equitable?
Yep, we included that in the TA request, and also, part of the overhaul of coordinated entry in our community and other communities is replacing the VI SPDAT with a different assessment tool. So we also included that in the request. That there's been a national move away from the VI SPDAT, but there has not been a commonly identified tool to replace the VI with, and so the communities have been developing their own, have been testing that against equity metrics. That is a very involved process, and so we also included in the request that we want some assistance around a new assessment tool.
Maybe for people here, can you explain what that input, the VI SPDAT, or however you say that, and just as a preference, when I was homeless and my mental illness was activated and they started asking me all those questions, I was really afraid of the police and being arrested for sleeping in doorways. So I wasn't participating. They didn't get an accurate score. My homelessness was continued.
Perfect picture of the need to redesign our coordinated entry system. The VI SPDAT is the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. Horrible acronym. But it is an acuity assessment, so it asks people a lot of very invasive personal questions to try to understand vulnerability. To be sure, the intention is to be sure that the most vulnerable person gets the next available resource. But it is a difficult process, and some of it has demonstrated disparities in some communities. We've not seen that in our data that this group has looked at here for coordinated entry. But there, again, is a national move away from the VI SPDAT, and an expectation from HUD that that assessment is part of the coordinated entry process. So we will need some kind of assessment so that we can really understand what people's housing needs are in particular, and how to best match those people with available interventions. So again, much more to come. This will be a very involved process once it gets up and running.
Emily, David, anyone. So it was to my understanding years ago, maybe 6 years ago, as people were being placed on a housing list, or I will talk about specifically speaking with a gentleman who clearly was disabled, and he told me that he was placed on a housing list, and I said, "Who is your housing with?" And I, when he told me where he was placed, I said, "Why didn't you get placed on Disability Partners housing list? Because you should be before anyone because you are disabled." He said, "I didn't know." And this is about sharing data and like putting people on the right list, because you were now lumped into a list of other people where you are not being prioritized. And this is what I mean by like, this is what HMIS is supposed to, why we separate, right? And when we share data, we get people housed quickly or more, placed in the services that you're supposed to directly be placed in. Am I correct?
Again, perfect example of why we need to redesign our coordinated entry system. So right now, coordinated entry only pertains to referrals into rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, so very specific, does not include disability partners, for example. But there's plenty of opportunity to broaden that to be sure that we're really maximizing the resources in our community.
So key entry systems, or I can't remember what the name it is, if anybody else has that name of the key programs and other
targeted
programs
units.
for, right? So they're not part of coordinated entry?
That's currently true.
Were they ever?
No.
No. Okay. So there's a possibility to get them acclimated into this system so that they can be prioritized?
Yes.
Potentially.
Yes.
We do have many units across North Carolina that are designated for people with a disability. And our goal in working with the Department of Health and Human Services is to keep these filled, right? They've been designated, they're tax credit units. And so as much as we can, get these systems communicating and making sure that people who are eligible can get into those, I think it's a really important point. Thanks for bringing that up.
I will say there are some of those referrals happening. For example, if someone got referred into permanent supportive housing through coordinated entry, they could end up in a targeted unit, a key unit. But it's not as systematized as it could be. That's the opportunity in this system redesign.
So we need to designate somebody who is really good at doing targeted units and speaking out about them in order to get this work done.
Any other questions about coordinated entry discussion? Funding allocations? No.
We haven't had any meetings and there are no updates, but we'll continue to stay tuned until the new COC funding committee.
Is there a need to convene that subcommittee potentially before the new board and committee structure is in place?
I think potentially. I think we need to probably in the nominating and membership committee, we need to really map out a realistic timeline for the funding committee in the new COC to be seated, to be appointed, to be sure that we don't have a gap between, to be sure that we are ready for ESG, which will come probably in June, and then COC, which will probably follow that. So my recommendation would be not immediately, but potentially.
Any other questions around that? Or any of these topics?
Could I, before we go to public comment, can I follow up on your question about last year's continuum of care score? So last year, and this is in your meeting materials from May of last year. Last year, again, it was a 200-point score, and our COC scored 133.25. So we did increase. Last year, the highest score and the median score were both higher across the country than this year, meaning overall across the country, COC scores dropped just a bit, and our COC score increased a bit. So headed in the right direction. Okay,
time for public comment. Anybody?
Could I make one comment before?
Yes, sure.
I just want to say, for this committee and for the community, while we're having fun doing all this great work that we're doing, I want us to all still remember that we have intact families that are in our community having the same issues that we're discussing right now. We have kids that are being in school that are affected through our McKinney-Vento program. So while we're building out these systems, I want us to all still remember that we do have that issue in our community. I know that organization I work with, Helping At-Risk Kids, there's some committee members here today that would like to speak during public comment, but I just want to make sure that we own that space to say we do have families that we need to consider while we're doing this work.
Okay, shifting to public comment. Any public comments?
Really, I'm Peter Leifert with Helping At-Risk Kids, used to be the Guardian Ad Litem Association of Wincombe County.
Here, make sure you speak into the mic. Nobody will hear you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elvia. So, Helping At-Risk Kids, we continue to get requests from McKinney-Vento, social workers at school, at DSS, Homeward Bound, Elida Homes, other organizations in the community about emergency housing, temporary, transitional, they say. Okay? In other words, there are kids. And we're concerned with kids, so there are a lot of adults without kids. That's not us. So we're oriented towards families with children. So we keep on getting requests. Now, we have some money. We allocate a few $1,000s a month to helping with motels. But we're not able to respond. And these agencies are coming to us because it doesn't appear that there's a lot in the way of resources to do this in the community. So in conversations that we've had with a few of these organizations and a little bit with Emily and Debbie, basically we say, okay, we'll go after some money, a grant, to help temporarily until COC figures out what to do with this emergency transitional housing and getting, as part of it, getting these kids and families with children into a more permanent situation. So we can hope for a week. Starts going for 2 weeks or something, it pushes our budget. We don't have a separate grant fund to help with that. So the intention is, for the time being, to be able to respond positively to social workers' requests. We're not trying to deal directly with homeless people. I like some of the things that, trying to get all the information together, who's available to do what and when, but resources. So we plan on submitting a form, I think, to you all to get some feedback and maybe endorsement. And then we'll go after some money if you think that it's worth doing it on a temporary basis, whether it's Code Purple now, it'll probably be afterwards, but the requests will continue to come. So it won't be HUD money, it'll be more like Dogwood type money, okay? And that'll be on us to get it. But it would be nice to know that you think it's important and the COC thinks it's important by way of endorsing it. And Marcus and Carol and I are 3 members of HARC. We're here to say, tell us yes or no. Do you want us to get this money? Because we're not able to answer all the requests right now that we get. And that's basically it.
Can we put that on the agenda for a more detailed presentation at our next meeting?
As you wish.
The answer is yes.
Yes,
please.
No, but it might be good to know what we're voting on specifically. It might be good to know what we're voting on specifically. I mean, certainly we support other resources, and you should make sure that referrals are being made to the family shelter beds that we do have currently and that are being funded in the community through the Safe Shelter Group, which is only 10 beds, so probably isn't enough to meet the need, but at least it's a resource that where people should be aware that they can apply there and potentially get a bed.
Yeah, and to part of the response is, the proposal would be to try to nail down the demand that is not being responded positively to. So, yes, we know that there's a demand. We don't know how much it is, so we don't know how much we need, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll try to put a proposal together that you can look at, that makes some sort of sense.
Was it specific to youth?
Helping at-risk kids.
At-risk kids.
So youth have to be part. I mean, they could be individual kids. Like we have a grant from Dogwood to help homeless high school students. Some of them are without parents. They're still children. They're youth. Okay. So we're working in a couple of high schools with homeless kids. But yes, kids have to be involved as far as we're concerned because that's who we are. Okay. All right. Yeah, individually or within families.
Emily, is this something that the grant writing that your office would offer assistance with?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Do you mean, would we write the grant that they would submit to Dogwood?
Not write the grant, but as far as guidance?
I think our role certainly is to provide technical assistance to anyone across the community who is working to expand capacity. So certainly we can have some conversation. Our specific role related to grant funding is to facilitate those processes where you all are the decision maker, which is different from, if you're seeking grant funding from Dogwood, for example, Dogwood certainly is the decision maker. I'll add also for next month, just process point, I think, if you have an active grant application that you're prepared to submit, there is a process to request a letter of support from this board. There's a particular form that gets included in their meeting materials. If that's different than what you're seeking, if you're seeking more sort of a general endorsement from the board for an approach or a program, I would suggest that that might be a written proposal that could go in their meeting materials that could get voted on next month.
Marcus and I'd be glad to help you, when you get to the grant piece, if you need some pointers and direction and, some assistance, we'd be glad to work with you on that.
Especially as far as the demand side is concerned, because you seem to have a lot of information about the demand for shelter. And of course, Marcus in it.
All right, let's carry on this conversation between now and the next meeting. Any other public comments?
And I want to add also including Elida Homes in this because they deal with a lot of the youth puzzle piece here.
We'll make sure Peter heard that.
I'm back. Stephen Mariscalco again. So I'd like to share a story with y'all. So I know some of y'all have probably some level of knowledge or experience with this story, but I want to share it with you because it's something that I'm been involved in for about a week now at least, really heavily. I mean, sometimes you have things that remind you of something, sometimes it's not something that's new, but so I do casework with an organization, and it's not a full caseload, usually one or two a week, or one a week, and sometimes they linger over, but the particular case that I'm working on right now is two homeless individuals, and one person is, they have had, I don't want to give too many details, but they have had some medical issues, and they needed to be staying at Haywood Street Congregation for the respite care. And they were there, but they left there because they could not be there with their significant other, because that person was so worried about their other significant other's safety and shelter and just being able to be present with that other person that they left Haywood Street Respite and had to go back to Haywood to talk about it once that surgery was then later infected further, which they went back to the hospital. They sent them back to the hospital because they had to have surgery and get a piece of them further removed because of that. When you're talking about low barrier shelters, let's talk about where couples can live together, where married people can live together. Imagine your whole world has come crashing down on you. Some of you only have lived experience, some don't, but your whole world's come crashing down, and all of a sudden, you need housing, and you're like, okay, I'm willing to go into shelter. I want to go into shelter, but I can't go with my loved one. I mean,
Doesn't Salvation Army offer that?
We have let husband and wives now stay in the same bedroom, family room, if it is required. So right now, we do have a family that's completely together in one of our rooms. However, we don't have any space available for more families or couples, but we have been doing that.
okay.
And that is definitely part of the shelter team's approach, to make sure that families can remain intact if they need to access shelter and move in.
And I have heard that before. I'm just trying to reiterate and try to drive it home a little bit. And also, if anyone does have any information, I have been through some of my contacts, I was able to find out that sometimes when there is an addiction in the process, that couples can stay together if they are codependent on that addiction together. And if anybody has information on that, where couples can go into like a rehab type of program and stay together, I would appreciate that, because that might be applicable to the situation that I'm dealing with right now. So I appreciate those words if anybody has that knowledge. Thank y'all.
I wanted to add to that a little bit. I think Lacey probably can do this better than me. The shelter model that we're working on, the idea behind that is separate entrances for separate issues, families with their dogs, pets, and I want to just say, and most people have heard this statement before, a lot of people are one paycheck away from being homeless. And so, yeah, so at any moment, any one family can be homeless with the dog, the cat, and everything, and moving and transitioning a family into a shelter is kind of what we're trying to do. And keeping that together and making it rare and brief.
Yes, and preventing homelessness whenever possible. Any other public comment? All right.
David, I just have a follow-up. That Facebook page is called Asheville Survival Program.
All right. Any other announcements or comments from the committee? Next meeting, Thursday, April 11th. Same place, same time. Thanks a lot. We're adjourned.